this is India's moment. What you learn from interacting with people, that is absolutely invaluable.
What's a belief that you were taught growing up that you've had to unlearn to become who you are today?
Life's not always fair, I mean, when you're younger, you're more idealistic.
How did you choose your first job or field of study?
I think nothing goes waste. It'd be absolutely okay to take the risk and pivot.
What's the biggest myth about money that you think young people need to unlearn?
Money can never be your mission.
What, in your opinion, makes a young person valuable in a startup environment?
Hunger for learning.
Hi, and welcome to She Means Business podcast. I'm Kimaya, a 17-year-old student who's on a mission to explore different career paths, ask big questions, and help girls like me dream bigger. Today I'm here with someone who I'm really excited to speak to, Ms. Shweta Rajpal Kohli. She is currently president at the Startup Policy Forum, and she's had an incredible journey. From being a journalist at NDTV to working in tech policy with global giants like Salesforce and later Peak 15 Ventures, one of the most powerful venture capital firms in India. She's been at the intersection between media, technology, startups, and government, and I truly believe that she is shaping the future of how young people like me will work, lead, and live. Ms. Shweta, thank you so much for joining me, and I'm so excited to speak with you.
Thank you, Kimaya. You have a lovely name, and I love the name of your podcast, She Means Business, because I used to have a show myself which was called We Mean Business. So,
wow.
yeah. Thank you for having me.
Before we begin, it'd be great if you could share a little bit with the audience about your journey.
Sure. So I think I've had a very unexpected but super exciting career path. Very grateful for so many opportunities that I got along the way. As you'd mentioned, I started my career as a journalist, first as a print journalist, so spent about 7 years across some of the leading newspapers in the country, including in the Indian Express, Hindustan Times, Times of India, and Business Standard. Made a switch to broadcast journalism, which I think was a fascinating journey in itself. It was very different from what you see television journalism these days, and spent about 11 years as a television journalist, which included both a lot of on-field reporting, but also news anchoring and having my own shows and interviews. And then moved on, made a completely different career switch into public policy, because I call that my mid-career crisis of sorts, when I was like, okay, I've done this for close to 2 decades. What do I want to do for the next 2 decades? And the one thing I knew was that journalism is not something I wanted to continue doing. And then, public policy seemed like a very natural extension of the kind of work I had done, and to leverage on everything that I had, in some ways learned and built on during my journalism career. So started with Uber, led their public policy team in India, South Asia, moved on to Salesforce in a similar role, and then Sequoia Capital, which is now Peak 15 Partners. And now it's yet another pivot where I have set up the Startup Policy Forum.
And I'd love to know, what were you like in school, and were you someone who always knew what they wanted to do?
Well, what was I like at school? I think I wouldn't want to blow my own trumpet, but I can say I was a good student. So front bencher, head girl, topper, always wanted to perform well. So yes, I think that was something that, I was always driven, but I don't know if I knew what I wanted to do. No, that I think, like most kids your age, everyone's still figuring it out, and I think it's okay. So I definitely did not know what I wanted to do. But this is 30 years ago, a little over 30 years ago, that you'd still be in that era where I think you all are very fortunate now. You have parents who let you, explore your dreams. I think we still belong to that era where it was like, medicine, engineering are the careers to pursue, especially if you're a good student, right? So I did end up taking science in 11th, 12th, which is probably one of the few regrets I have, because I don't think I was ever cut out to be a science student. And then because I took up science as a subject in grade 11th and 12th, you're in 11th, right? Yeah. So then the natural thing was, okay, you've taken science, may as well sit for your pre-medical exams. And you know what? I failed miserably. So that, I think, but it's good, because sometimes failures in life are important. You're so used to, just your successes. So I think that was a reality check, but it's also a realization that I'm probably not cut out for that. And I think whatever happens, happens for the best. With due respect to the medical profession, I think it's a beautiful profession, but I'm glad I did not become a doctor.
But you've done so many other things like journalism, policy, and startups. And if you were my age and you saw your CV today, what would surprise her the most?
Everything. So I'd be very surprised because for me, journalism was not by design. It was purely by default. So as I was telling you that I failed my pre-medical exam and then it's like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? I don't know. The only thing that I think defined me was that I said I want to do something offbeat. So it should not be something run of the mill. It has to be something different. And I think it was mostly decided that I would continue staying in Delhi. And as you know, being a Delhi girl yourself, that there are only a few colleges you want to go to, right? So there's LSR and there's St. Stephen's, or there's SRCC. SRCC is all commerce, so that was not something that I would pursue. So it was between Stephen's and LSR, and I think that's why I say it's by default and not by design, because I used to live like down the road from LSR, like a 5-minute walk. So it was your college of choice because if nothing else, it's down the road and so easy to access. And of course, I probably feel that there's a different charm in doing your youth specials and going to Delhi University and all of that. But when you have such a stellar institution and you have gotten through admission there, which is so hard to get, it's obviously a college of your choice. And they actually were starting a journalism program, so it was the first batch of journalism honors, so a bachelor's in journalism program that LSR was starting the year I was graduating from school. So I think it was just by default that I applied and I got through, because they had an entrance, they had an interview process, and that's how my journalism journey began. And the only thing that I remember I was very nervous about was, because I'd gone to a co-ed school, right? So I went to Modern Barakhamba, and it's as co-ed as it can get, you know what I mean, yeah. Right? So having been a modernite and studied in a co-ed school, to suddenly go to an all-girls college was like a big question mark. Will I be fine? But I think I loved every minute of my time at LSR. Yeah.
At that time, was it ever a consideration to study abroad or not?
Well, no. I think nowadays it's the default option for most kids your age, I think, and most would. But, because of family circumstances, because I don't think it was something that I thought, at least during my undergrad for my college. And, Delhi did feel like, if you get through LSR and you get through a program like journalism, it was a very coveted program at that time. And as I said, ours was the first batch that started. There was a lot of, I think, hype around this one because, we were very fortunate. We had the chief election commissioner as one of our guest professors, D.N. Seshan, who at that time was considered, a stalwart in public policy. And, we had some of India's topmost journalists coming and taking lectures for us. So I think I was quite thrilled that I got through this program without actually ever knowing I would. It was just that the program started, the college was great, it was literally next to home, next door. So those were the factors.
And not many girls know about careers working with startups. So could you explain in simple terms what you do and why it matters?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So we are a startup serving startups. So just to help you understand, we're not a classic startup. Like, we're actually an industry forum. But because we're just a few months old, we're building it out like what the energy of a startup would be or the structure of a startup would be. So yes, we are a startup in that sense. But we are not, we represent the startup industry and in helping them solve policy issues. And I can just explain to you why this is important and why this is significant and why I'm so excited about this, because it is in some ways a white space that we feel was not being addressed. And during my time at Sequoia Peak 15, I realized that founders have so many pain points when it comes to engaging with government institutions, regulators, and very often because, founders do not have both the time or the understanding or the budgets to manage a lot of the policy issues that come their way. You need someone who would handhold them and would do it for them and would help them understand. Now, of course, you'd say there are industry forums, and yes, there are several, and I would say legacy institutions that have done a remarkable job in public policy and have supported startups. But we do understand that, founders today function in a slightly different way. Startup leaders have very different needs, and we're trying to address that through the Startup Policy Forum. So our three goals mainly are, Kimaya, first, we want to do policy advocacy, and that's why we're called the Startup Policy Forum, because we remind ourselves every day that we exist to serve the policy needs of startups, and we don't want to ever go away from our core mission. But I think as we're evolving and building a community of members, we're also realizing that community building is very powerful these days, right? Having a curated community of like-minded people who can, come together, discuss issues, or even just hang out together, right? I think that aspect for us has become very big. Now we're leading delegations across various countries where founders want to go together, meet investors or meet, leaders. So I think those are byproducts of creating a community, but that's also an exciting part of what we're doing. And I think third is just positioning the Indian startup ecosystem globally. So whether it is global startups wanting to come to India, whether it is global investors wanting to come to India, or Indian startups having global expansion plans, we can be that glue and that platform and that intermediary or bridge to help serve some of those needs.
So, what did you learn at Peak 15 about startups and founders that schools and textbooks don't teach us?
Everything. I'm so grateful for my time at Peak 15. When I joined the Sequoia Capital and then we rebranded, I was an integral part of that journey. And I think everything that I had to learn about the venture capital and startup world was here at Peak 15. And I think that in some way completed the whole cycle for me, because I understood the big tech space. And when you worked at Uber, it was also technically a startup, right? So I'd led public policy at Uber and understood what it means to, be at the intersection of technology and regulation. And now here I was setting up and scaling a function like public policy. And it was a first for the VC industry to have this kind of a role like public policy. But what it gave me was tremendous ability to understand founders and work with them closely. And I absolutely loved that. So I think it was an accelerated learning journey for me. Number one, just being and working with some of the brightest minds in venture capital, and, attending programs like Surge, you have such amazing sessions there, whether it is sessions led by Shailendra or Rajan, they're some of the finest names in venture capital, or it is sessions that were led by some of the top founders that came in that program. So, you had the privilege of being a part of that. But more than that, I think I always say, whether it's journalism or it's policy or it's startups, what you learn from interacting with people, that is absolutely invaluable. So the time that I spent actually engaging with founders, helping them solve some of their problems, being with them as part of their journey, I think that learning is very, very precious. And that's what's helped me today shape the Startup Policy Forum.
And what's a belief that you were taught growing up that you've had to unlearn to become who you are today?
That's an interesting question. Well, a lot, but I think the one thing that sort of I would say is life's not always fair. I mean, when you're younger, you're more idealistic. You feel you can control outcomes. You feel you can lead things the way you want to. But a lot of times, circumstances are not in your control. Situations are not in your control, and you have to go with the flow. And you have to learn to give up what you can't control. I still find it very hard to do, but it's something that I'm learning to do even now.
How did you choose your first job or field of study, and was it based on passion, practicality, or pressure?
So like I'd said, the first job was because I was doing journalism honors, and I was still in college, and we had a dissertation which was, which I had submitted. And then we had the Indian Express come on campus for campus recruitments. And Shekhar Gupta, who's a stalwart as an editor, he came to campus, and I think 3 of us got the job. So I started my first job with the Indian Express. At that time, they had a supplement called Express Newsline, which was all about covering city issues and issues that impact, Delhi as a city. And it was great learning because, we could really go deep into covering civic issues as such. So that was my first job. I think, as I'd said, journalism was not either passion or, it was not something that I had thought I would do, but it ended up being my default profession. And then, I was very grateful that I got a job right out of college.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever regretted leaving journalism?
No, everybody asks me that question, and the real answer is no, because I think I left at just the right time. I'd spent 18 years in the profession, and while I say it's absolutely one of the most, I would say, amazing professions that one could be a part of, because it teaches you skills that last you a lifetime. When what you learn as a journalist stays with you, and the skills are are absolutely incredible because you learn how to multitask, you learn how to be a jack of all trades and yet go in depth when needed. You understand the value of time and immediacy because you're always under deadline pressures. You can multitask like no other. So it gives you a lot of skill sets and relationship building because that lasts, right? You cannot be a journalist and not know how to build relationships and honor them and have trusting relationships. So I think a lot of those skill sets, which are soft skills, last with you for a lifetime. And you're if nothing else, being inquisitive. I think what else that I feel as a journalist you learn is that you've spent so much time covering news and meeting important people and bright people in your life that you're never enamored by wealth, success, titles. You don't feel intimidated. So I think that's something that sort of stays with you, and you can deal with a lot of situations. None of those things matter to you. So I think I gained so much from the profession that still stays with me and I'm grateful for, but I don't regret leaving it because I miss the energy of the newsroom. A newsroom is a newsroom. You cannot compare it with any other place. But I think the timing was perfect because I'm very grateful for my public policy career. I learned so many skills even there, and journalism today is not what it was in our days. At the cost of sounding too old, I want to say that I was a journalist during the glorious years of journalism. It's a very different profession today.
So, is that what tells you that it's okay to not stick to one thing forever, like the change that occurs like as time goes by?
Absolutely. I think the startup world teaches you that, and I think that's something that I firmly believe and champion, that you should be okay to pivot. While they say once a journalist, always a journalist, the skills should stay with you, the learnings should stay with you, but you should be willing to pivot and take up new challenges, new careers, new ideas. Of course it's hard because sometimes you have to start from scratch, but I'm actually of the opposite belief. I think nothing goes waste. Anything and everything that you've done in life will come in handy at some point and will be of some benefit to you. So you should be absolutely okay to take the risk and pivot and try out new things.
A lot of us fear being judged or not being good enough. And how did you overcome these thoughts if you've ever had them?
I still fear being judged. I still have those thoughts. I think it's human. And it's okay to accept that we're all human and we all constantly fear being judged. But yes, I think it's very important to realize that you cannot please everybody. You cannot constantly be worried about how you're being judged, and you have to follow your belief. Because if you're doing right, in the long run, people will understand you for who you are. And I think being judged is something that comes with being human because you'll always be judged. You'll always be judged. So if you let that bother you beyond a point, then it's only going to harm you because those who have to judge will judge.
I feel like journalism would be something that helps with that fear, though, did it?
It did. I think it's very hard to be a journalist in today's times of social media because, while journalists are also accused of constantly, doing negative stories, hit pieces, I think the kind of scrutiny that journalists are also under is immense. Like, when I left the profession, social media was just taking off in the manner it has today. But being a television journalist in today's times is hard because you'd be judged for every question you ask. You'd be judged for, so it's not an easy profession. But I agree with you that you can take a lot more of the judgments because you're so used to, you become thick-skinned to the point that that everybody will have an opinion on anything you do. So you just have to follow your beliefs and keep going. That's important.
Yeah. And what's the biggest myth about money that you think young people need to unlearn?
Oh, money and young people. That's an interesting question. I have two kids, a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old, and both view money very differently. So I don't think I want a generalization about young people and money because I'm sure everybody has different views. But the only thing that I at least tell my children, and I think what's very important to understand is that money can never be your mission. Money should always come. If you want money to be a factor that gives you that comfort, of course, money is very important, right? Everybody should have financial goals, financial ambition. But it's very important to know that if you're chasing money, then it's easy to lose that money. So we should chase. So the three things I think that nobody can take away from you is, number one, your hard work. Number two, your skill sets that you either have or you build or you acquire. And third is your character, right? Those are three things that belong to you. Money can come and go. So I think the only thing I would tell young people is, number one, money can be transient. Let's all hope everybody makes so much wealth and money that it's never, but it can go up and down, right? So I think it's very important to understand that. And two, don't chase it, let it follow you. Do your bit and it will come. So I think that's the second part that I feel. And the third thing I would say is that yet it's not easy, right? So the value of money, and I may sound like, again, a very, very parent-like thing that, oh, value money, don't be entitled, it's hard work, money doesn't grow on trees, all of that. I think we've all heard that as kids, and we're going to give that same wisdom to our kids. But I do think that it's very hard because with family structures changing, disposable incomes increasing, it is true that money is a privilege that comes with a certain, I would say, strata of society, and it's very hard to keep reminding yourself that it's not easy to earn. And also in today's times of venture capital and startup world, it does come easy sometimes. So that reminder that it may not stay with you always.
And what, in your opinion, makes a young person valuable in a startup environment, even if we don't have the amount of experience?
Very valuable. I mean, I think, I think two sides to that. Number one, age is no longer a criteria. We all know that, right? Because you've seen so many young, successful startup founders. But I also think that we should not make that the norm. Oh, that you're 17, you should have a startup by now. I mean, that's, I think, unnecessary, undue pressure on today's younger generation. Oh my God, look at that 17-year-old. He's already got a startup that got a funding of like $2 million. What are you doing with your life? I mean, I think that's a bit insane also. But and the pressure that you need young founders. So I think, number one, yes, youngsters today have the level of understanding, drive, context that you bring to the table that probably is more valuable than someone with experience, because Gen Z is understanding the world very differently. You will build products that only you understand and we won't. You're growing up in a world like, just the generational difference that you're seeing is actually more stark generation after generation because of the way technology is evolving. You all have grown up in a world where smartphones are part of your living. It's an extension of your life. We've not. And so when I talk to my 15-year-old daughter, she often reminds me, but this is what we've grown up with. Do not tell us about how you used to watch Doordarshan once a week and how we should not be addicted to screens, because this is our life. I still have vivid memory of my daughter at when she was 2 years or 3 years old, and then we had a television screen at home, and she climbed up and then was trying to swipe the screen, and then I'm like, okay, that's because she's seen the iPad. I mean, for her, everything is touch screen, and she thinks that screen is touch. So I'm just saying that it's a realization that the generation is growing up very differently, and so the context you would have about products that work for you, about trends that are shaping your world, will be very, very different from what we would have, and we cannot match that, right? At the same time, experience matters, right? And wisdom matters. And I think a good combination of the two is an ideal outcome.
Yeah, because I feel like younger people are able to give input that's valuable depending on like the people, like our age group is the next generation. So to know what's going to work.
100%. Let me give you another example. So when I'm discussing AI regulations and we're talking about, copyright issues, and we're talking about, issues like privacy, you're talking about issues like intellectual property on AI and the kind of challenges that's coming. So our dinner table conversation these days is that, because my daughter's an artist and she had very strong views on AI. And, it was very interesting to hear it from her lens, that how she feels about, whether it's the Ghibli art or whether it is about, copyright and how artists are viewing AI. So I think you all are the generation of tomorrow, and you're in many ways going to define the services and products of tomorrow.
And you've worked at the intersection between startups and government. So why do you think that space is important, especially in a country like India?
Hugely important. We're a democracy, right? And I think nothing excites me more than the fact that the democratic system is at work and is at play, right? The fact that today we can set up a startup policy forum, the fact today that we can have top startup founders come and join a forum and have a seat at the table, have a voice with the government, shows you that democracy is at play. And the fact that we need to make sure that this democratic process is healthy, thriving, and flourishing, and that we can engage with government stakeholders, we can have a voice in policy making, to me is very, very important, because I'm a firm believer in the fact that the government means well and the industry means well. No founder is here, most founders, actually, I will not say no, most founders are not here to flout regulations or to do anything that would be anti-national or against the law, or most of them want to build good, well-governed businesses that would flourish and do well. Similarly, most bureaucrats or politicians or ministers are not here to hurt the industry or come up with regulations and policies that would not serve the industry well. So what I always tell both founders and bureaucrats is to assume positive intent. Founders mean well and the government means well. It's all about bridging that gap. And so to your point, I think policy is very important, because policies can make or break a business, and we know that, right? They can provide the headwinds, they can provide the tailwinds. So it depends on which end of that you're on. And I think constant engagement with the government, constantly sharing those inputs is very, very important. And that's what we're hoping to do at SPF.
Yeah. And if I want to work in a venture capital or public policy someday, what should I start doing right now while I'm still in school that would help?
Hunger for learning. I think that's true for most professions, but it's very, very evident both in venture capital and public policy, because look at the times we're living in, Kimaya. I mean, you wake up one fine day and DeepSeek has happened, and you know what? Millions of dollars gets wiped out. You have policies that are changing the trajectory of nations, of businesses. We're living in absolutely unprecedented times. And to just cope up with the sheer madness around you or the sheer trends around you requires you to have a quest for learning, a curiosity, a hunger for learning, where you're constantly okay with, because if you're in venture capital, you have to be on top of trends. And to be on top of trends, you have to have a passion for reading, learning, absorbing, applying. So I think that's very important. And the same holds true for public policy, because it's a different world, different stakeholders, but you need to keep pace with what's happening with governments around the world.
And what qualities or mindsets have you seen in founders or policy leaders that all young people should develop?
I think similar, I'll build on the fact that you need to be a learner, and you're learning every day. You need to be a learning machine. You need to be a sponge. You're constantly absorbing, constantly applying, constantly pivoting. So you're always in that hunger for knowing that you're as good as, if you're a founder that is, got a customer base, you're as good as your last record customer you got, right? And for a policy person, you're as good as the last good meeting you had or the last policy you managed to get changed or whatever. So I think the fact that the startup world is so agile and it's so fickle and it's so evolving, that need is a lot higher, that you have to have the ability to pivot. You have to have the ability to change, to adapt, to constantly learn and apply. I think that is something I would say is topmost.
And what's one event in your life that has shaped you?
I was in college second year, and I had got an internship with the Times of India. So we were doing journalism, and internships are important. So I landed an internship to do 2 months of reporting at the Times of India. So this was, let me recall, should be 97, right? Second year college, 1997. And it was my second day at the Times of India, young, starry-eyed, in the midst of a newspaper office. And a very unfortunate tragedy happened. I don't know, you may not recall, your parents probably would. It was the Uphaar cinema tragedy, where in a movie hall in Delhi, in the heart of South Delhi, 60 people lost their lives because a fire broke out. And it was hugely unfortunate, but you know how a newsroom functions when there is breaking news. All hands on deck, everybody is sent to cover that episode, right? And I was I think 18, 19 years old, and I was sent to cover, and because they were short of reporters, people were going to homes of families. It was very, very tragic. I mean, more tragic than, I think it still haunts me. And I was sent actually to the cremation ground. And there was a family, and I had never been to a cremation ground, so it was heartbreaking, and it was traumatic to the point that it really shaped me in terms of, um, getting a reality check on how every profession is so hard, right? And this is what I think my day 2 or day 3 in as my internship. And this was a family that had lost 7 family members. It was I mean, sad is really, really an understatement. It was. And what was crazy about that for me was that I came back and I had to write the story, right? So first you have to absorb your emotions, and it's everything you've learned in textbooks, right? When you're in journalism school and you're taught that you're objective, right? It's like you have to be clinical, because at the end of the day, it's like a doctor. You're operating on someone. You can't be emotionally attached to the person you're operating on, because your hands will shiver, right? So similarly, when you're typing a story, you cannot feel emotional about the subject, because you have to be objective. Your subjectivity cannot come in. You cannot, and that hardcore news versus the kind of opinion writing we see now. But hardcore news is, it's clinical. It's your 5 W's and 1 H. What, where, when, how, So you're just answering those questions. What happened? Where did it happen? Why did it happen? So you're clinical, you're objective, and you're writing a story that has actually shaken you up so much. And for me, the hard bit was that when I woke up the next morning, it was front page, 5 column, and I had a byline. They never gave interns bylines at that time, because you're an intern, you're not a staffer, right? But you had your name there. So I had my name there in the Times of India, my first byline. So the mixed emotions that, it's a story that was so hard to do, and yet it was your first byline in a newspaper front page 5 column story. So I think, to me, the fact that I couldn't sleep for days after that, and especially one family that I kept up with, the Krishnamurtis, who lost both their children in this horrific tragedy. It reminds me now that I'm talking to you that I have to connect with them again. But I think it defined me in ways in which I realized that life is not easy, because when you're in school, college, it's your reality check moment. Life is very different. So sorry for a little, digressing into it, but we should continue. Yeah.
So moving forward, how do you see the next 15 years in India to look like?
I think India is seeing absolutely amazing amount of growth. I mean, this is India's moment. We've heard that very often, but truly you feel it in the energy. You feel it when you're talking to founders, when you're talking to the government, when you're talking to global investors. I think India's moment is truly here, because especially now, if you look at it in the kind of, I think many of the other countries and what's going on everywhere else makes India look good. And what we have, just sheerly in terms of our demographics, in terms of the fact that we have that growth potential, in terms of the energy, in terms of the the demographic dividend that we enjoy, the I would say the domestic consumption story of India, the fact that there is entrepreneurial ambition. So everything is stacked up in favor of India right now. And I think we've got to really botch it up to not be on the path of being clearly one of the the fastest growing country in the world. So
I know we kind of covered this earlier, but over the next 15 years, do you think that teenagers should be encouraged to start building ideas of their own or companies, even if it's before university?
Well, yes and no. So I would say yes, encourage, but it has to come from the heart. What I feel is a lot of force fitting these days, where you're like, you're young, startups are getting funded, go build and get funded, right? I think that to me is a bit of a herd mentality, which will never last, because while I am a big proponent and champion of the startup ecosystem, and I truly believe in ideas, I think it's okay for youngsters to say, we want to work for a little while, we want to be in the corporate world, we want to gain the right experience, and then when you truly feel passionate about an idea, when you think this is you. So I think the answer is, it depends. We have in our membership a young founder, Naman Pushp of Airbound, who actually started his drone tech company when he was 17. And he's got great funding. And today he was, we had a roundtable with Minister Piyush Goyal. He was sitting among some of the most seasoned founders and making a strong case for regulations on the drone tech sector. And we felt very proud. But I think what's important is that, do you truly believe in that product? Do you truly believe you can build it out? it's great to have those stories, but when you drill down too many of those stories with youngsters, I think you're putting undue pressure. And it's very important that it has to come organically and it has to come from within. And you don't have to say everyone needs to now be a startup founder at 18. Yeah. So that's important.
This conversation was honestly so eye-opening, and I know that every girl listening to this is walking away with a little more courage to dream bigger. So thank you so much for not only sharing your journey, but for making the world more open and accessible to young girls like me. And before we end, I just wanted to ask one more question. Sure. What's one big change that you'd like to see in India's startup ecosystem by the time girls like me graduate college?
Well, I think I'll make a shameless plug for the Startup Policy Forum. I'd like to see more startups engage more with government, and I'd like to see them be very open to the idea that they should be not just founders but nation builders. They should have both a voice and a seat at the table. They should want to give back to the country, because I think right now, especially with founders who've seen success, especially with founders who have so much to share, pay it forward is what I would tell the startup ecosystem. And if we can all pay it forward, we'll see this ecosystem grow.
Thank you so much. And to everyone listening, remember that it's okay to not have it all figured out, but it's important to stay curious and ask bold questions. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next episode.